Welcome, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something really cool.
Mm.
Um, we're going to explore how the history of Japan, and especially the shogunate period and all that stuff about honor and shame, how that might still be affecting the way Japanese people think even today. And we'll compare that to English-speaking cultures, which obviously have a completely different background. It should be super interesting. Oh, and by the way, this deep dive is sponsored by Top 5 Japan. We found some pretty diverse sources for this one, too. Everything from travel blogs to Japanese language learning stuff, and even an article about secondhand shopping in Japan.
Yeah, it's funny how something like secondhand shopping can actually tell you a lot about a culture and their values. I mean, it's not just about saving money, right? It often goes deeper than that, like
Yeah.
ideas about resourcefulness and making the most of what you have. Sustainability, too.
Yeah. Okay, so let's break that down a bit. I was checking out these articles on Tofugu about learning kanji and katakana, and the thing that really stood out to me was how structured and systematic the whole approach is. It's almost like every single character has a specific place, and you absolutely have to learn the rules perfectly.
Right, and when you think about the history of Japan, especially the shogunate period, it makes sense. I mean, it was an extremely hierarchical society back then. Knowing your place and following the rules was everything. And that kind of social order, it often ends up influencing other parts of life too, even things like language.
So is it kind of like when you're learning the language, you're also learning how to navigate all those social rules and stuff?
You got it. And that's where the whole concept of shame comes in. You see, in Japanese culture, shame has always been a really powerful force when it comes to shaping how people behave.
Mm.
It's all about keeping things harmonious and not doing anything that would cause you or anyone else to lose face.
So like even making a tiny grammar mistake could be a big deal.
Yeah, it definitely could be, especially if it seems like you're being disrespectful or you don't understand the social hierarchy. Think about how complex Japanese honorifics are. Using the wrong one could be a huge social blunder.
Wow. So learning the language isn't just about the words. It's like learning a whole set of rules for how to act.
Exactly. And that focus on social harmony and avoiding shame. You see that reflected in tons of different parts of Japanese culture.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating.
It really is. That reminds me of another interesting thing about Japan. Like when you look at how people travel there, it often reflects that desire to kind of avoid uncertainty and, maintain that harmony we were talking about.
Oh yeah, like on that Top 5 Japan website, they have all those super detailed itineraries.
Exactly. Having a plan like that means you're less likely to run into those unexpected situations. The kind that could throw off the harmony of the group or cause someone to feel embarrassed.
Wow, that is so different from how I usually travel. I'm more of a just wing it kind of person. But I can definitely see how that could be stressful in a culture where social harmony is so important.
It's a different way of looking at things for sure. And it's not just about avoiding negative stuff, it's also about trying to be the best you can be and upholding that sense of honor. Remember, in a shame based culture, honor and shame are like two sides of the same coin.
So if I'm understanding this right, it's like there's this constant pressure to live up to these expectations.
Yeah.
And you really want to avoid bringing shame on yourself or your family.
You got it. And that pressure can actually be a really strong motivator. It can push people to achieve incredible things and maintain those high standards of behavior. Think about the reputation of Japanese craftsmanship, for example, all that attention to detail.
It's like every little thing you do reflects on who you are and whether you're bringing honor or shame.
Precisely. And that sense of responsibility, it goes beyond just the individual, it extends to the whole group. In Japan, the needs of the group often come before the desires of the individual.
That actually makes me think about those articles on secondhand shopping in Japan. Could that also be related to this idea of collective responsibility?
Absolutely. It's not just about being thrifty or saving money, it's about not being wasteful, respecting resources, being a part of a sustainable society. In Japanese, they have this concept called matanai, which basically means regret for wastefulness.
Huh. So it's almost like you have a moral obligation to avoid wasting things. That's pretty powerful.
It is, and it shows a very different relationship with material possessions than you might see in a culture that's more focused on having the newest thing and individual consumption.
Wow, this is giving me a lot to think about in terms of how the values of a culture shape how we act and even how we define success. Would you say that these historical influences like the shogunate period and these ideas of shame and honor are still influencing Japanese society today? It's wild to think about how these things from so long ago could still be affecting how Japanese society works today.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind. I mean, modern Japan has obviously changed a lot over the years. But certain values and ways of doing things, social norms, they often have really deep roots. It's like those values become like a part of their culture, a part of how they see the world. And it influences how they approach all kinds of things like solving problems, being creative, even how they think about what it means to be happy.
Yeah, I'm really curious about you mentioned problem solving earlier. Can you talk a bit more about how that might be different in a culture that's been shaped by all this history?
Sure. So imagine a culture where fitting in and avoiding shame are super important. You might see a lot more emphasis on making sure everyone agrees, like building consensus. It's not about one person pushing their own solution, it's about finding something that works for the whole group, even if it takes a little longer to get there.
So it's like individual achievement isn't as important as the well-being of the whole group. That's pretty different from what we're used to in Western cultures, where it's all about competition and standing out from the crowd.
Yeah, it's a different perspective for sure. And it can also have some really interesting effects on creativity, too. For example, in Japan, there's a strong tradition of apprenticeship and mentorship. So individual creativity is still important, but it develops within this framework of shared knowledge and respect for what came before.
So it's not just about coming up with something brand new. It's more about improving on what's already there and honoring the people who came before you.
Exactly. It's more of a collaborative approach to innovation, if that makes sense. It's about refining and perfecting things rather than just trying to completely change everything. That's not to say that Japanese culture isn't innovative. It's just that the way they approach it might be different.
Okay, last question, and it's a big one. Do you think all these cultural differences could also lead to different ideas about what it means to be happy and successful? Like in a culture where honor and the good of the group are so important, what does it mean to live a good life?
That's a great question, and I think the answer might surprise some people. If things like harmony, duty, and belonging are really important to you, then maybe you don't measure success by how much money you have or how famous you are. Maybe it's more about how much you contribute to your community, how well you fulfill your role in society. Maybe happiness comes from knowing that you're helping others and making the world a better place.
That's a totally different way of thinking about happiness. It's not about going after what you want for yourself. It's about finding fulfillment through helping others and being connected to something bigger than yourself.
Exactly, and it really makes you question that individualistic idea of happiness that we often see in Western cultures, where it's all about personal fulfillment and achieving your own potential.
Wow, this deep dive has been really eye-opening. It's amazing how things from the past can still shape a culture's values and even how they define happiness.
I agree. It reminds us that culture is such a powerful force. It shapes how we see the world and how we experience life, often in ways we don't even realize. And understanding these influences can help us appreciate just how diverse human thought and behavior really are.
Oh, true. Well, on that note, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's always more to explore. We encourage you to keep learning about Japanese culture and see what other connections you can make, and maybe challenge some of your own assumptions about the world along the way.
Until next time, keep diving deep.